It's now been over 3 years since James Gunn officially revealed the first 10 projects of the DCU's first chapter titled Gods and Monsters, and a lot has changed since January of 2023. In this video, I want to check in on the 10 projects originally announced for the DCU and give an update on the status of each, what we officially know, what's rumored, how some projects did, as a couple have already been released, and in the case of some, whether or not they will ever see the light of day. To be clear, we are just talking about the 10 projects officially revealed back in January of 2023, projects like Peacemaker Season 2, Clayface, and Mr. Miracle, which have since been revealed or even released, will not be talked about. To kick off, let's start with the projects that have already been released, and of course, the first project to come out for the DCU was Creature Commandos, which was overall a critical success, and it felt like people who watched the show thought it was solid and a fun watch. The only issue is barely anybody watched the show, which I think is a shame, but also not really surprising considering the cast of characters which were featured in Creature Commandos make the Suicide Squad look like A-list celebrities. However, even with the lack of viewership, and I would say overall impact, we do know that Season 2 for Creature Commandos is in development and most likely set to release in 2027 or 2028. Hopefully, since its debut in December of 2024, the audience of Creature Commandos has grown, maybe as people have just randomly discovered it on HBO Max, or perhaps Superman has brought more attention to the DCU and has had fans discover Creature Commandos. I'll admit, I still don't think Season 2's viewership and reception will be all that much different than Season 1. Of course, I'm sure they're hoping for a slight improvement in the viewership, but I honestly think that's okay. Anyone trying to say Creature Commandos needs to succeed for the DCU to be successful is just lying. Creature Commandos should just be a fun pocket of the DCU that should not be necessary material for any of the larger story of the DCU, and if Season 2 is anything like Season 1, I think it'll justify its existence as a fun part of the DCU that adds new layers to the universe and perhaps can branch out into more if someone has a good idea on how to use the characters on a broader scale. For example, the likes of Clayface and Rick Flag Sr., which we know are going to be much more heavily involved in the future of the DCU, as Clayface is getting his own movie, and also Rick Flag played a big part in Superman, Peacemaker, and now will play a large role in Man of Tomorrow. Of course, what everybody considered the true kickoff to the DCU and the first big project was Superman, which released last July, and I would say was a success. Now, to what degree, I will let people argue about that in the comments, as I know there's been plenty of opinions on whether or not the film did well enough at the box office and whether it was liked enough. From my perspective, I thought it was without a doubt a success, considering the massive pressure on the film and the fact that the DC brand outside of Batman had basically been run into the ground for the better part of the prior decade. I wouldn't say it was a home run, but certainly a solid double, and for the beginning of the DCU, I think that was perfectly okay. It is imperative that DC builds on that success though with some other projects we will talk about in a bit, but more specifically Man of Tomorrow, which is set to release in July of 2027, which needs to be a massive hit for the DCU. Anything short of a critical success, and I would say a good step up in the box office from Superman, would certainly be disappointing. I know some people will say the film needs to cross $1 billion to be considered a success, but I would disagree. I think 800 million is probably the minimum you would like to see from a sequel to Superman, and man, if you thought there was pressure on Superman, Man of Tomorrow will probably have a similar amount of pressure, if not more, with the WB Paramount merger looming. If the DCU starts struggling, and specifically Man of Tomorrow bombs at the box office, I would not be shocked if DC fans would be looking at another reboot on the horizon, which honestly would just be so damn miserable. However, before we get to Man of Tomorrow, there will be two projects from the original slate revealed that audiences will see first and also need to succeed so that the DCU can continue building its audience and momentum. Those two projects are Supergirl in June and Lanterns in August. With Supergirl, based on all the rumors and discussion we have heard, they are immensely confident in this film, especially the performance of Millie Alcock, who apparently is an absolute star, which for anyone familiar with her work doesn't sound all that surprising, and I certainly think there's a good chance she could be a massive pillar for the DCU going forward. Alongside Millie Alcock's Supergirl, we also get the debut of Jason Momoa's Lobo, which I have immensely high hopes for, as I think Jason Momoa is perfect for the role, and I am very curious to see how the character will be implemented considering Lobo does not play a role in the Woman of Tomorrow comic. However, I do think the inclusion could be a really fun addition and wise decision, as I really do think it could get more fans in seats, as Jason Momoa is an actor who has done surprisingly well at the box office in the past, and Lobo is a character that many have been waiting a long time to see on the big screen. I will admit though, I am slightly worried about how this film will do at the box office. We are too far away to get truly worried, and like many movies, I definitely think this movie's performance will be heavily affected by its overall reviews, which we will not know officially for quite some time. But if Supergirl can find a way to hit $500 million worldwide or more, I think that'd be a really solid performance and show that the DCU has a bit of staying power, as $500 million worldwide is significantly better than the DCEU films post Aquaman. Now, if Supergirl has a crazy budget of $200 million or more, then we will be having a different conversation, but as of right now, I've not found anything legitimate regarding the official budget for this film. Lanterns, on the other hand, will be a bit harder to judge success, as we will not be able to track the box office, but this is a show that hopefully will garner a much greater audience than the DCU DCU's 2 other television projects, as Green Lantern is a character that is immensely more recognizable than creature Commandos or somebody like Peacemaker. As of right now, to say that audiences are divided on what we've seen so far from Lanterns feels like an understatement, but at the end of the day, overall trailer reactions and rumors regarding production could easily mean nothing as long as Chris Mundy, Damon Lindelof, and Tom King deliver a great narrative that hooks audiences. Of course, we will have to wait until August to see what those creatives have truly delivered, but based on overall social media discussion and trailer viewership, it certainly looks like Lanterns has a chance to be a big hit for the DCU, as even though not all of the talk has been positive, there has been a lot of talk about Lanterns, and I do think there will be a large chunk of people who will tune into episode 1 to see what the show is truly like. Whether or not Lanterns has the goods to keep the initial audience around and hopefully even grow it, we will have to wait and see. Now we get into the other 6 projects of the initial slate reveal that currently do not have a release date, and for some of them, we don't even know if they are still actually in development, regardless of what James Gunn has to say, which I understand he needs to keep a strong front, and him admitting projects are dead is not really a smart move and makes him look bad, but come on, some of these projects certainly feel like they're gonna end up in the same camp as Blade. And to kick off that list is The Authority, which we have literally not heard anything about. There's been no legitimate news about a writer, a director, or even a time frame for this movie to come out. Hell, we don't even get rumors or leaks about The Authority. Okay, that's not entirely true because there has been just one singular rumor basically about The Authority, and that is that the project is potentially going to be animated. Literally, that's it. Now I do want to say in regards to The Authority, I think an animated version could potentially work, but I also think if you're gonna do it, you really should just go for it and put it in live action. I really am intrigued in the idea of seeing The Authority in the DCU, as I think they could serve a very cool function, especially if they were to go up against Superman, or maybe they establish themselves and cause the formation of the Justice League in response to them. But it just seems like The Authority movie is too much of a financial risk considering the huge budget the film would most likely require. Maybe if the DCU continues to build momentum and become even more successful over the next few years, a swing like The Authority could make sense and even work, but if The Authority were to come out in say 2028 or 2029, it would almost certainly be a box office disaster with the limited appeal of The Authority. In order for The Authority to do well at the box office, most likely, it would need to be like a 10 out of 10 movie, and as we've seen throughout box office history, even if you are an amazing movie, that does not guarantee financial success. I think if they're ever going to do an Authority film, they need to keep peppering the characters in throughout some of the projects in the DCU, similar to what they did with the Engineer in Superman. So at least the audience would have an idea of who these characters are and the fact that they relate to the DCU, because if you made an Authority movie right now and released an Authority trailer, I think most of the general audience would think it's probably just a spinoff of The Boys, even though The Authority is not as grotesque and dark as The Boys is. However, before James Gunn and Peter Safran can determine whether or not greenlighting an Authority film makes financial sense, first they need a good script and something worth greenlighting, and based on everything that we know and what James Gunn alluded to in 2025, the development is not going so well for The Authority, so it doesn't seem like Safran or Gunn need to make a decision anytime soon. In my honest opinion, this movie is probably not getting made unless James Gunn himself wants to write it and direct it, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility considering James Gunn did say that The Authority was a passion project of his, so if he really wants to get it made, I think he's probably going to have to do it, but as of right now, I don't think we're getting The Authority anytime soon. Another project we have heard very little about is Swamp Thing. Now, at least with Swamp Thing, we know that James Mangold will be directing and writing the film, but we have yet to hear much from Mangold in regards to the project, as since he has been revealed as the director, he has been busy with things like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, A Complete Unknown, and also his Star Wars movie, which was believed to be coming out before Swamp Thing. And as of right now, I would say that's still the belief, but recent rumors seem to suggest that Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie could be put on the back burner, or maybe even canceled under the new leadership at Lucasfilm. Since 2023, Mangold has shared some details about what his vision for Swamp Thing is, stating that he views it as a standalone gothic horror film. He also made sure to mention that even though DC may view it as a franchise, that certainly would not be his intention, and I'm sure that's fine in the eyes of James Gunn and Peter Safran, as much as I am sure they would love to have Mangold deliver an amazing Swamp Thing franchise. If Mangold can deliver a great standalone movie that establishes the character in the DCU, that would be satisfactory, and they could eventually hand the character off to somebody else, which we have seen plenty of times in these connected universes. James Mangold is an immensely talented director who has not only done amazing things in the comic book movie space like Logan, but also other amazing movies like Ford vs. Ferrari, 3:10 to Yuma, and Copland, just to name a few. It would be a huge get for the DCU to actually have James Mangold direct this movie. I know I'm immensely excited by the prospect of him directing a Swamp Thing movie, and as of right now, he is certainly still tied to the movie. However, there simply hasn't been any positive development updates in quite some time. If I had to guess, it certainly seems like his Star Wars movie has been his top priority since the release of Complete Unknown in December of 2020. 2024. And if he continues to develop his Star Wars movie, I'd say the absolute earliest we get something like Swamp Thing, if it's still going to be directed and written by James Mangold, is probably 2030. The only way we potentially see Swamp Thing much sooner, in something like 2029 or maybe 2028, is if he were to quit his Star Wars movie or if it were to be canceled, which again has definitely been rumored as a possibility as of late, but nothing has been reported by anybody legitimate. Sadly, if you're excited for Swamp Thing, I wouldn't get your hopes up for anything soon. The most likely release date is looking to be sometime in 2030 or later, which would be like 7 years after the initial announcement of the film, which is absolutely crazy. A project that we actually got a really exciting piece of development news for in the last year, and certainly seems like it could be coming out well before something like Swamp Thing, is Booster Gold. And that positive news is the fact that we actually have an announced writer for the series, and that is David Jenkins, who is best known for his work on Our Flag Means Death. Now, to be clear, just because David Jenkins has been announced to be writing the pilot for Booster Gold, that does not mean that the project will actually be greenlit for development. It is very possible that David Jenkins and DC Studios may never see eye to eye, and DC may be looking for a new writer again, but this is better than nothing. And David Jenkins himself even confirmed his involvement in the show, and it mentioned that he inherited the project from Danny McBride, who was originally set to develop the series. Since the announcement of David Jenkins as the writer, we have yet to hear much about the series, but at least there is some positive signs. Hopefully we get some updates about this project at some point in 2026, and maybe, just maybe, if things start really picking up, we could see Booster Gold released in 2028, which I think is a fair timeline for the show, as currently 2028 is a barren wasteland for the DCU. The only DC project we know that is set to release in 2028 is Dynamic Duo, which is set outside of the DCU. Another possible contender to be released in 2028 is The Brave and the Bold, which is a project set to be directed by Andy Muschietti, and as we learned a couple of months back, will be written by Christina Hodson, who worked with Andy Muschietti on the massive success that was The Flash. I'm hoping you can sense my sarcasm, but I digress. Regardless of how you feel about this duo, which I personally am rooting for, but certainly am very nervous about what they may deliver, there is no denying that James Gunn and Peter Safran want their own Batman in the DCU, and this project is definitely in development. Now, I would say the earliest we get this movie is 2028, as James Gunn has made it very clear he does not want two Batman movies to come out in the same year, and the Batman 2 is already set for an October 2027 release date. When it comes to how far along in development The Brave and the Bold is, all we know is that the film is currently being written, and James Gunn has hinted several times that he is heavily involved in the writing of this movie. So for those of you who are a bit nervous about Hodson's involvement and her very spotty track record writing films in the past, it definitely seems like there's a chance James Gunn could be co-writing this film. Now, whether or not that makes you more or less nervous about The Brave and the Bold, that's completely up to you. I do think it's very likely that by the end of 2026, we start getting some casting and a lot of updates about this movie, as I do truly think the plan is to get this movie out in 2028, and to do that, filming will almost certainly have to start in like spring or summer of 2027. Batman is the big cash cow for DC, and even though I am sure they will give Reeves the space he deserves on the release calendar, there is no doubt in my mind that Gunn and Safran are racing to get their own Batman on the big screen so that he can cross over with the likes of Superman. One project that I was immensely excited about when it was first announced was Paradise Lost. However, sadly, since its announcement, there really hasn't been anything to get excited about, as we have no clue who is working on the show. It was rumored roughly 2 years ago that Kira Snyder and Janet Lynn were being eyed to develop this series. However, outside of that rumor, there really hasn't been anything substantial regarding the development of Paradise Lost. A few weeks ago, in fact, it was reported that the show had been canceled. However, thankfully, James Gunn denied that report on social media. At the very least, it was encouraging to know that it has not been canceled, but that does not mean we are going to be getting the show anytime soon. If I personally had to guess, and to be clear, this is just a guess, I do think it's very likely that Gunn and Safran have just put a much higher priority on getting Wonder Woman herself established, as we know a Wonder Woman movie is in development, and honestly, I do think that is smart. Not only because Wonder Woman is such a vital character to DC, and the idea that we were going to have to wait years to see her in the DCU was pretty stupid, but I do think if you're able to deliver a good Wonder Woman movie, it will only increase the interest in something like Paradise Lost, which of course is going to be much more focused on Themyscira without Wonder Woman. I'm really hoping this show does eventually get released, as I thought the idea of Themyscira times Game of Thrones was a great pitch and would add another great corner of interesting story and characters to the DCU that could maybe cross over eventually, but also could just sustain themselves without larger tie-ins. Another TV series that we've sadly heard very little about is Waller, which is pretty crazy considering when the show was originally announced, we actually had writers attached, those being Crystal Henry and Jeremy Carver, which honestly makes the lack of news seem even worse, as it definitely seems like the holdup most likely is due to some sort of problems that the writers have run into during development. I love Viola Davis, and I think she is an immensely talented actress, and I will never be against seeing more of her as Amanda Waller, as I do think she's perfect for the role, but I did always think it was odd that one of the first projects in the brand new DCU would be a show about Amanda Waller. I understand that part of the universe actress Gunn is very fond of, and I'm sure the original intention was to tie it directly to Peacemaker, but I do question whether or not it would have been a smart choice. I do think there was probably some interesting things to do story-wise, and regardless of what you give Viola Davis, she's going to turn it into, at minimum, something watchable, so I definitely think it had a high floor in terms of the overall quality, but I just don't know if it was a very smart risk to take financially, especially when you're first establishing the DCU. But when it comes to what we know about the project as of late, we basically have not heard anything except the fact that supposedly it is still in development, but it certainly does not seem like we will be seeing the show anytime soon. However, now I want to know, is there a project from the original slate reveal that you are most excited for? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.